My presentation is about the US-Russian dialogue on the Iranian nuclear program since 1992 to 2015, when the JCPOA was concluded. And this is one of the few topics that the Russians and the Americans enjoyed a substantial bilateral cooperation. And here are some lessons for the further cooperation on this issue. The structure of my presentation is as follows. First, I will try to divide the timeline of my research case into 3 stages, and at each stage I will try to tell the key developments, the achievements, the missed opportunities at those stages, and the lessons which we could learn from this experience. And the first one is from 1992 to the year 2000, when basically the US adjusted Russian foreign policy. Russia elaborated its general strategy on Iran, didn't know necessarily what to do, to what extent to cooperate, to what extent they should not have done that, and Russia would take an issue-by-issue approach when each time they had a project to go in for it. With Iranians, they had to consult with the Americans and decide what to do and what to not. And Russian foreign policy was extremely flexible, but I would not say that the Russians would always say, okay, well, to whatever the United States would say. It was a kind of a discussion on all the levels. However, I think that the cooperation, in its cooperation with Iran, Russia was not watchful enough and trusted Iran slightly more than it should have. Poor policy coordination and poor export control regime in Russia at that time made the situation even more complicated, but still the parties, meaning US and Russia, managed to agree on certain issues. And the US patiently adjusted Russian foreign policy by both offering incentives and imposing sanctions. And the most important thing is that dialogue was constantly maintained at all levels. And what were the missed opportunities, achievements, and lessons? Due in part to the US pressure, Russia did not supply Iran with any centrifuges, as the Ministry for Atomic Energy in Russia planned to do so in 1995. Both Russian agencies like Foreign Ministry or some others as well were opposed this deal, but together with US pressure, Russia decided that no enrichment program, no facilities built by Russia there. At the same time, with the US help, Russia strengthened its export control regime and introduced a bill on a comprehensive export control regime in Russia in 1999. And then after Putin was elected, he also restructured the export control regime scheme, and all the bodies were reshaped. Well, that was another achievement. And under US pressure, Russia agreed to limit its cooperation with Iran in the military field, and decided in 1995 that in 5 years Russia would stop military cooperation with Iranians until if nothing changes. Well, at that time, as Dr. Einhorn told me a week ago, that no opportunity in bilateral cooperation with regard to Iran's nuclear program was missed. Here are 3 lessons. The first one is that demanding everything from a counterpart is counterproductive. Instead, one should set feasible goals, focus on them, and be ready to invest time, effort, and sometimes even money to achieve them. And by saying that, I mean that for quite a long period of time, the US administration tried to discourage Russia from constructing a Bushehr power plant, which was futile actually, and instead of doing so, the US administration could try to make this cooperation more transparent and actually benefit from that by receiving some information and exchanging with Russians. Joint efforts are always better is the second simple lesson. For that, one needs to be ready to slightly adjust one's own approaches in order to accommodate the interests of its counterpart. And it actually relates closely to the first lesson. And of course, the third one is that abusing power through the use of sanctions against one's own partners delays the resolution of problems that both partners face. And I think that the Clinton administration knew that very well, because at some point US and Russian administration has coordinated the imposition of sanctions on Russian entities in order to avoid a broader array of congressional sanctions against the Russian government. And it was quite like to see that level of cooperation when Russians tell which entity should be imposed sanctions on in order to have better relations in general is something which we cannot observe right now. So we move on to the next stage from 2001 to 2010 when Russia tried to adjust the US policy. By that time, Russia had defined its own strategy on Iran, in which it placed its own interests first and then the US ones. And Russia was convinced in the necessity of cooperation with Iran in the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, the revelations of 2001 regarding Iranian nuclear program and some further developments made Russia more circumspect with respect to its cooperation with Iran. Iran actually suggested having negotiations in 2003, but the US rejected this proposal. And EU had to begin the negotiations, but again, partly due to the US pressure, Europeans failed to reach an agreement. In 2005, they suggested that Iran should, like all of a sudden, they suggested that Iran should suspend its nuclear enrichment program for 10 years, which was like, and before Europeans didn't have such a stance on Iran, and then Iranians became less interested in compromise with the West, especially after the election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Then EU3 was joined by Russia, the US, and China. However, it was too late in 2006, and a serious crisis loomed large, with stakes rising as new sanctions were imposed. Well, I will kind of repeat this in a more structured way. Achievements of that time is that Russia supported EU3 efforts to normalize the situation with Iran, and when Iran decided to sign the additional protocol to the safeguards agreement with the IAEA, Moscow was chosen as the venue to make that announcement. At the same time, Russia was stick to a double-track diplomacy with Iran, and it displayed the unanimity with the P5 when Security Council was imposing sanctions on Iran from 2006 to 2010, and Russia kind of ruined its own relations with Iran at that time by intentionally failing to deliver SA-20 system, delivery of this system to Iran, which was originally meant for securing Iranian nuclear facilities. And if Iran had received that at that time, Iran would be more aggressive in terms of defending its own right to enrichment. But unfortunately, this period is mostly marked by missed opportunities. Well, the first one, which I already mentioned, when the US adopted the strategy of axis of evil, and well, since 1979, Iran was calling evil the United States, but that was US turn to do that, and it ruined the possibility of having a really nice negotiations with Iran on nuclear issues, on terrorism support issues, on all array of problems which we are having right now. Well, another missed opportunity is the 2005, which I already mentioned, when for 2 years Europeans were negotiating with Iran and actually recognized Iran's right to a small-scale enrichment program, but then all of a sudden said, no, we just changed our mind, you can't have any enrichment program for 10 years. Then actually, even though Igor Ivanov, who was at that time already former foreign minister of Russia, paid a visit to Washington, D.C. and convinced George Bush to form P5+1. It was a Russian initiative, but unfortunately it was too late to do that. So had they done that a year before, probably things may have been resolved like 10 years ago, not last year. And the lessons to learn is that one should not stigmatize its own counterparts. It prevents from beginning substantial negotiations. Watchful cooperation is the best way to have both reliable information on the counterpart and a leverage against them. And I mean Russia's will to cooperate with Russians to construct this power plant, at a certain point when Iranians were not so cooperative with the IAEA, Russia would pause the construction of the nuclear facility, and Iranians had to change their stance to be more cooperative with the West and with the IAEA. Exchange of information is an effective way of influencing one's own counterpart, and here I mean the US-Russian cooperation, because under Clinton administration, Russians and the Americans exchanged information on the Iranian nuclear program pretty well, but under Bush administration that was not the case. And of course we understand that it is not okay to disclose all the sources, and it's like a very delicate issue. But at the same time, as General Yevstafiev once said, there is no such a price that would not be worth paying in order to prevent a country, a threshold country, from acquiring a nuclear weapon. So we have to keep that priority in mind and try to find some ways to cooperate and exchange that information. And of course, one of the lessons here is that interpersonal relations do matter, and the higher the level of communication is, the better, because, well, the State Secretary and Russian Foreign Minister, they can solve a lot of issues, I believe, but without having a clear signal from both capitals and both presidents, it is almost impossible to do so. That's why the cooperation on all the levels is really, really important. And the final stage, I have, I don't know how much time I have, but I'll try to be brief. After the year 2010 and 11, Russia believed that UN Security Council sanctions almost exhausted their potential, and unilateral sanctions from the US and the EU undermined any positive dynamics and threatened to start a political turmoil in Iran. And together with EU3, China, and China, Russia closely cooperated with both the US and Iran to establish a bilateral dialogue. Actually, when Iran and the US agreed to have such talks, all the process became more and more fast and efficient. Well, the achievements, the major one probably, is that no conflict between the US and Iran took place, and US managed to keep its allies from attacking Iran as well. Being the only partner of Iran in the nuclear field, Russia was able to maintain Iranian trust, which was necessary at that time, and suggested the framework for the negotiations between the P5+1 and Iran based on the reciprocity and step-by-step approach. Russians believed that since the parties did not have any level of trust with each other, they should make some small steps and go ahead and then try to resolve some more complicated issues. Though at that time in 2011, neither Iran nor the United States were ready to go ahead with that plan and stick to it, but it certainly helped them to provide a better and more viable solutions to the Iranian nuclear program. Well, the JCPOA has been concluded, and the parties mostly adhere to the plan, which is really nice. And all the delegations, and Russian one included, made significant efforts and inputs in the deal. The Russian one here was that Russians convinced Iran to stick to a threshold for LEU stockpile at the level of 300 kilograms, which would make the breakout time period for Iran much longer. And Iran would have more centrifuges, but still no capacity to produce a bomb, well, in short time. And actually, Russians invented the mechanism for the US, and or developed a mechanism for the US delegation to snap back sanctions on Iran on its own, which was really necessary for the US delegation to know that if Iran doesn't follow and doesn't stick to the agreement, then the US would be the only country which would snap back the sanctions on its own. Well, no major opportunity was missed, I think. And the JCPOA is the best deal that the parties, mainly US and Iran, could agree upon. And the lesson is that pressure and sanctions only cannot resolve an issue. There should be diplomacy, which, though it is difficult, but it is worth trying. Well, they require, diplomatic means of resolving crises require enormous patience and effort. It is more effective to start from small steps, not demanding everything from a counterpart, like you topple your nuclear program and then we will have negotiations. That doesn't work actually. And trust is a result of cooperation, not the reverse. Beginning of negotiations on pressing issues should not be conditioned by a high level of trust. Actually, parties start cooperating and then they come to a more trustworthy relations. Well, that is actually a list of all the lessons I managed to find so far. Well, I would be happy to hear from you their comments on this.
Thank you.